Okay, everybody. So just a quick introduction then. My name's welcome to our first webinar from Warmer Sussex, a beginner's guide to retrofit. So my name's Cath Geoghegan. So I help to manage Warmer Sussex along with Natasha Birch, who's here.
Hey there.
Natasha's going to be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you've got any questions that come to mind as we're going through this presentation, if you can pop them in the chat, and what we'll do, we'll have plenty of time at the end where we'll be able to answer as many as we can. If we do run out of time, don't worry. What we're going to do is after this session, we can send you a copy of the presentation that we're going to go through, and also the Q&A. So any of the questions that we don't answer, we'll send to you as well. I'm also joined by Sarah Kemp. Can I say hi, Sarah? So we can know who you are.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah works with Warmer Sussex as a retrofit coordinator, and she also runs SK Architects down in Shoreham. So thanks to everybody who's already introduced themselves in the chat. Anybody who's joined a bit later, please do just let us know whereabouts in Sussex you are.
Got someone from northeast London.
Oh, goodness me. A little bit further afield, but that's fine. We welcome anybody. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder that we're recording this session. Please use the chat for asking any questions. As I said, we'll answer as many as we can. So I'm just going to start just giving you a little bit of background about who we are. So Warmer Sussex is run by a not-for-profit cooperative called Retrofit Works. And Retrofit Works manages a similar kind of projects across the UK. So we have projects running up in Oxfordshire, in London, and some new ones in places like South East Cambridgeshire. But yeah, we're doing this work in a few places across the UK. We're pretty new. We started back in 2014 by Russell Smith, who's still runs the organisation in response to the Green Deal. If those of you can remember back to 2012 when the Green Deal was launched, there were some concerns about how the process is working, and that it was really geared towards big supermarkets and retailers and energy companies who are subcontracting to do energy efficiency work. And it was really difficult for small businesses. So the Retrofit Works model was set up to help those small contractors and installers who had been doing this work all along, just so they could be able to work together to be able to support the Green Deal. Anyway, the Green Deal, as if you haven't heard of it, you know what happened to it. It didn't work particularly well and was soon closed down by the government. However, the model has continued to work really well. We have 3 different groups of people who are part of our cooperative. We have what we call advocates. So these are the community groups, the trusted advisors who locally, may be interested in responding to the climate emergency. It could include local authorities. It's those kind of groups of people that are trusted by their communities in terms of giving advice and recommending how people can take action. We have practitioners, which is the name that we give to all the technical experts that we work with. So that includes the contractors who install energy efficiency measures. It could be specialists such as architects or damp surveyors, and also people like Sarah, who works with us as a retrofit coordinator. They sign up to a code of conduct to work with us. They're all fully trained, they're vetted, and they're monitored by us as well. So, for example, in terms of training, we've set up a risk assessment and method statement for safe working under COVID-19, and we've shared that with all our members, and they all could follow those procedures if they don't have their own. But most of them do right now. But in the early days, they were able to follow our procedures to help them to continue to work last summer. And then we have associates as well. So no entry requirements for associate members other than supporting the work that they do and trying to eliminate the barriers to retrofit in local communities. So what we do today is a flexible model. So we work with some local authorities across Sussex, with East Sussex, to helping them deliver fuel poverty schemes. So this is where we help people on lower incomes to improve the energy efficiency of their home. We also work to design programs with our advocate members. So some of the projects that we've got elsewhere in the UK are working with some of our advocate members, such as the Low Carbon Hub we work with up in Oxfordshire. So Warmer Sussex is just one of those programs, and we're working across Sussex. When we initially set up, we've been working with BESCO, which is a community energy organisation down in Brighton that you may have heard of, and also with the Citizens Advice bureaus across Sussex. So specifically with the teams in Hastings and Arran and Chichester, but they're working with us on behalf of all the Sussex Citizens Advice. So we developed this programme with them to engage the people of Sussex and to help them understand retrofit and help them to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. Okay, so tonight I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context about why home retrofit is important, to define what it is, what retrofit is, and what you want to avoid. Sarah's then going to go into the overview of the different ways in which you can retrofit your home and be more energy efficient. And then we'll talk about the next steps in making your plans. So we'll touch on some of the options, such as if you're thinking about getting help to finance your improvements, and then we'll open up to questions. So it should take us about half an hour to run through our presentation. So hopefully we've got plenty of time to answer any questions that you have. And as I said before, if you can pop your questions in the chat, Natasha will keep an eye on those. And we'll try to answer as many of them as we can this evening. So why retrofit? So this might be obvious to some of you, but I still think it's worth saying. The Committee on Climate Change, which is the independent statutory body that advises government on targets, has modelled the emissions from UK homes, and estimates around 20% of the UK's carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions come from the homes that exist today. And they use 35% of the UK's energy. So the Committee on Climate Change set a target that, if we need to reduce emissions by 24% from homes to reach the 1990 levels by 2030. And the government has set a target that we should be near zero by 2050. So there's quite a lot of work to be done there. So progress has been made in what they're called decarbonising electricity generation. So what that means is the way that we produce electricity. So a lot of electricity in the past was produced from burning coal and gas. I think pretty much got rid of coal. I think occasionally that it's still used to generate electricity. Gas is a real big contributor to generating electricity, but a lot more energy now is produced from renewable means, so including things like solar and on and offshore wind. So this is good news because it means the electricity that we use is less and less intensive or carbon intensive. However, the emissions that come from buildings have plateaued. So we've got very old and inefficient building stock still. And a lot of us still use fossil fuel to heat our homes. So a lot of us still use gas boilers or use oil boilers or LPG to heat our homes. And 80 to 85% of the homes that exist today will still be standing in 2050. So we really need to look at our existing housing stock and find ways to reduce our emissions from those. So there's other benefits. So if reducing carbon emissions to help tackle the climate emergency isn't enough, there are other benefits as well. So, improving the building fabric. So whilst you are, looking at the fabric of the building, looking how it could be insulated better, and also maintaining and fixing maybe potential issues with the building fabric, you are reducing energy, but you're also improving the comfort, how it feels in that home. Investing in housing. So, as as homes are retrofitted and improved, and people, we're talking long term here, people sell and move on, and then kind of retrofit the next house that they move into, you're improving the quality of housing. It's an investment in the housing, and over time, those in lower incomes or, and fuel poor households will have better homes and be able to heat their homes more adequately. Health improvements, again, linked to perhaps lower income and fuel poor households, but generally across the board, as the population is aging, it's really important that our indoor temperatures can be maintained to levels that are, for healthy living. There are risks around obviously living in a home that is got poor heating, not just damp and mold, but also how it feels to your mental health as well. And job creation. So by doing all this work, it creates jobs. There aren't enough people at the moment out there to be able to do this. And the recent Green Homes Grant Programme, which I'll talk a bit more about later, was created by the Treasury to generate work, generate income. And it can't be denied that there aren't enough people out there. And there's plenty of jobs out there if retrofit becomes a priority in the UK. So what is retrofit? So retrofitting your home is about adding or changing something that makes your home more energy efficient, warmer, healthier, and will reduce your energy bills potentially. It can be changes to the interior or exterior, and it can be large and small changes. So it could be as little as making your lighting more energy efficient, all the way to completely changing your heating system. Now, there are some risks around poor retrofit, and these are the kind of things that we want to ensure are avoided, particularly when it comes to the large changes. There's history of poor quality work being done. So maybe the installation hasn't, if insulation, for example, cavity wall, for example, has a particularly bad reputation for poor quality insulation in the past. Poorly designed projects. So it's really important when you're installing a number of retrofit measures into your home that it's designed well and you think about that way the whole house fits together. So a key part of how we manage retrofit is ensuring that we look at your whole house, so try to avoid some of those risks. Just doing one or two measures, what sometimes called shallow retrofit, and schemes such as the Green Homes Grant can encourage this by people just doing one thing like loft insulation, rather than thinking about everything they could, while they're going through some disruption in the home, thinking about everything that they could do at that time. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now to talk about the things that you should be considering, so to avoid falling into any of those traps and risks around retrofit. These steps follow the principles of the quality standards for retrofit, which is called PAS 2035. So Sarah will talk a little bit about that. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail around each of those individual measures. Next Tuesday, we've got another webinar that's going to be talking about insulation and ventilation in a lot more detail. So we're going to be touching on a lot of those tonight, but the real detail is going to be coming at the next week's webinar. So over to you, Sarah.
Good evening, everybody. So where do you start? Under the principles of PAS 2035, we follow the system of assessment, identifying and evaluating options, designing and specifying chosen options, the installation and the monitor and evaluate. Now, the assessment is usually where we come into your homes and look at what you've got in your homes. And every home is unique. You can have two houses side by side and they will still be very different. You have to consider the occupancy, how many people are living there, how are they living, their lifestyle can affect all that. And so that's the assessment phase. The identifying and evaluating is when we try to get the measures in the right order so they don't block future measures. And this is a whole house retrofit. So we consider your whole home as a whole system, and it'll be improved over time. So maybe you don't have the money to throw at it, so you just do it in stages, not as an individual element. And the designing and specification is when we look very carefully at how those measures will fit together. So junctions have to be carefully designed so that no mistakes are made. And this is it's the design element that's been really missing in the past, and when we've had poor results in retrofits. And we follow a fabric first, the goal of reducing energy demand as far as possible for introducing new energy. So we'll talk about a bit more about this later on. It's quality. We're looking for quality to reduce defects by specifying and designing well. And then finally, we monitor and evaluate to ensure that it's operating correctly and there are no unintended consequences. And we have a feedback system as well in the retrofit system, so that we improve as each house is. We lodge that, and we have a look and see how it's gone, how well it's performing. So in the next few slides, we'll have a look at how. Can I have the next slide, please, Kath? So the average home may have some cavity wall insulation. It may have its windows replaced. Sometimes I go to homes and they've still got single glazing. Unlikely to have their floors insulated. Chimneys may have been blocked up, or they may remain open and be using an open fire. There may be some loft insulation, perhaps in the rafters, in where lofts have been converted, or on the joists just above the ceiling. Overall improvements have been patchwork, generally added over time, and no consideration to them fitting together. Not certain what's been added or when, and we don't know how efficient these materials or what their lifespan is. Next slide, please, Kath. So an energy efficient home, our aim, the goal that we're working towards, is continuous joined up layer of insulation from top to bottom. So wrapping up your house, in combination with a continuous air barrier. So that stops the heat loss through air leakage. This will make the building highly insulated and airtight, and significantly improving its energy efficiency as it stays warmer for longer in the winter and also cooler in the summer. And it's really important whenever we look at making your house more airtight and insulated, is that we provide good indoor air quality. So the ventilation strategy has to be in place as soon as any insulation is considered. So it can get rid of the pollutants that develop in our homes, like carbon dioxide or the off-gassing of our furniture, or water vapor. They're all pollutants. So we can design a system that removes this and then brings in fresh air to replace it. And there are several different systems. It really depends on what level of insulation, of air tightness you're going to reach during your retrofit, and we'll cover that in more detail in future webinars. And these measurements should be designed with consideration of how the whole house works. Thanks, Kath. So you can see here, consider the different elements of a home and how heat is lost. There are major losses through your walls. We've got the next large area of heat loss is through the roof, and the windows to a lesser degree at 10%, which often it's the first thing that people will put in is new windows. And then through the floor, we've got 15% of the heat loss, and through doors, another 15%. These are all uncontrolled ventilation losses. And they sorry, just to give you a bit more uncontrolled heat loss, the infiltration of cold air. So cold air comes in, and the loss of warm air out of these these spaces. These are cracks and gaps and openings around doors, windows, timbers, floors. A lot goes out through the chimney, and junctions with the floor. I had an air test taken on my own home, and I went around feeling the draft through the skirting boards, you know, the junctions of the window to the wall. It was horrific. Really quite something to see it actually in process. And thermal bridges, these are losses from junctions between elements. So cold is conducted into the house or out of the house through incomplete insulation, the fabric of the building. And Cath, were you going to say a bit about the energy performance certificate?
Yeah. So the first stage is, in terms of planning a retrofit, is coming up with a plan and seeing what improvements can be made. So we just kind of talked there about a typical home and some of the places where heat is lost from and where you might want to prioritize. A lot of homes also have an energy performance certificate. So this is created whenever a house is bought and sold, and is required for any rented property. They only last for 10 years though 10 years is a long time. So if you've lived in your house a while, you probably wouldn't have a current EPC. But you can search for it online. I've just put the URL here. So it's recently moved on to gov.uk. If you Google for energy performance certificate, it should pop up. You can just put your postcode in there. And what you can see on the right is the ratings. So properties are given a rating from A to G, as if, same way as if you're buying a fridge or a cooker or a TV. So G being poor and A being pretty good. And the UK average is 60, which is in the band D, which isn't brilliant. Obviously we want to get as high as we can up that list. So the particular example I've got here is pretty poor. So the example here was a property that's got unfilled cavity walls. It's got a single glazing. It's got uninsulated timber walls, timber floors even. Potentially has very poor insulation in the loft. So, and the other thing to note is just above that A to G, you can see there's a little hyperlink there that says see how to improve this property's energy performance. So if you've got one of these at home, you can click on that, and this is generated when an EPC assessor visits your home. Now, it's a useful indicator of some of the things that you could do, and it will give you some ideas, but it doesn't consider your whole house. And there's an awful lot of assumptions that go into sometimes these EPCs where the assessor either can't confirm that you've definitely got insulation in your walls, or isn't able to look under the floorboards, or stick the head deep into the loft and see. So quite often there's assumptions made on this, but it's still a useful resource for just seeing where somebody has done a survey of a property, what you could do.
Okay, thanks, Cath. I'll continue with some of the measures that we can undertake. Wall insulation. There are several different ways of treating our walls. If you've got cavities and you're not in an exposed area near the coast, then cavity wall insulation can be a very undisruptive and effective way. I think a lot of people know that you can pump the walls full of various different types of insulation, my favourite being the polystyrene beads. There's also, you may have a much older property with solid walls, or even a much older property that needs to be treated carefully. Listed buildings, conservation area, you can't generally put external insulation, so you have to insulate from the inside. And this is a very delicate process which has to be considered. We often use natural insulation in these cases, these sensitive cases. Often an external wall insulation is another good solution for solid walls where you don't have a cavity, but also if you can combine this with cavity wall insulation, so long as your cavities are fully filled, and then external insulation will bring you really good levels of airtightness and insulation. Next, please, Cath. Oh, thank you. So we often find chimneys still have open fireplaces, and often recommend that these are, I mean, you can lose up to 3 cubic meters of air an hour through your chimney. So that's an awful lot of heat being whisked away. So during the summer when you're not using it, you can close it with a chimney sheet, which is a cowl on top, and you just pull it out when you want an open fire. We often suggest that you replace it with a gas or electric closed room secondary heater. And we're no longer recommending wood burners due to the harmful particulates that have been found that are damaging to health. Next slide, please, Cath. And then I did loft and roof insulation. Often find that people don't have enough insulation, so again we top that up. If the loft's been converted, it may be very cold still, as we found with one client. So we can investigate whether it's been properly insulated. Does involve taking down ceilings and refitting insulation. Again, you know, carefully designed so there are no gaps between the insulation, and that even the joists don't cause cold bridging. So you put insulation between the rafters and below the rafters. Also, that what we find in lofts is often some people will have insulation, but it's been compressed due to storage, which reduces the effectiveness. But this can be, we recommend that you build a platform so that the insulation is not squashed. There's lots of really good systems out on the market now. And don't forget the access to your loft, the hatch needs to be insulated as well, otherwise you've lost all your valuable work in insulating at the ceiling level. Again, ventilation of that, if you're laying insulation in a loft just for storage, then ventilation is very important, that you still keep the air moving through and removing moisture. If we let moisture, moisture is allowed to sit in the insulation, then it becomes damp and it doesn't work as well and can fail completely. Next slide, please, Cath. And then the floor insulation. So we all have 2 sorts of floors. We generally find that there's suspended timber floors, and this can be. We've got an example there where we put a membrane down and then fit natural insulation, another membrane on top, often not always essential, and then we could lay your floorboards and there's no change to the height in your floor. So a bit disruptive because you've got to take all the furniture out, but it can be quickly undertaken room by room. If you've got solid floors, it's a little more difficult. Some of the very slim insulations are expensive, but it means you don't have to change any of your door openings. Sometimes when you're doing up a rec, or you've got the opportunity to that you're replacing all the architraves and the framing around the door, then there's the opportunity to raise the opening, so you can lift the floor up and not affect, you won't be stooping when you go through the doorways. But that's it's a larger undertaking with solid floor. Sometimes you find little bits of solid floor in the kitchens, often when they were under stoves in the kitchen, there's solid floors, and you can often have those broken out. It's a bit messy, but if it's a small piece, it's worthwhile to get a good insulation result. Next slide, please.
Just to let you know, we're at 30 minutes.
Right, okay, I'll hurry up. Okay, gas boilers are the most effective, but alongside oil, they're being phased out slowly from 2025. It looks like electricity is going to be the future. It's more expensive. It's 3 times more expensive than gas, but the air source heat pumps work 360%. So they are much more efficient, and they work very well. If you've insulated, you do need to do a certain level of insulation for them to work really well, efficiently. And we'll again be talking about that in future webinars and go into more detail. Glazing, double or triple glazing. Triple glazing performs really well, but it can still be expensive, although it has come down in price. It also, triple glazing can reduce noise, which is often a problem in some areas. Secondary glazing is also an option for listed buildings and where you don't want to get rid of your lovely original timber windows. As these become, as your windows become more efficient, we have to be careful about the placement of the windows. They need to be in line with the main layer of insulation, whether that's in your cavity, it might be externally, it might be internally, depending on what measure you've chosen to undertake. The increase in air tightness for improving glazing can create condensation and mold elsewhere. So again, the ventilation strategy will combat this problem. Next, I think that's it. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah, for that. So these are the kind of the key improvements you could make to your home. But I guess a key important question is, how do I know which ones are most appropriate for my home? So we've got a couple of ways that we can recommend, certainly. So this first one is the Warmer Sussex Plan Builder. So this is free to use. So I think it's always a good place to start if you're not sure what you could do for your home. So the information in here is all based on EPCs. So the system that we use has gathered all the publicly available EPCs. And if that information isn't available, then it looks at a neighbouring property and kind of makes a reasonable assumption with some clever logic that the properties are going to be similar. So to use this, you just need to enter in your postcode and it will pull up your address. And if it doesn't look right, so if you happen to be very different to your neighbour, or it's out of date, you can update all of these. So it will, the roof, the walls and floors, it'll make assumptions about the insulation, what your heating system is, etc., as you can see on there. And all of these you can edit. So you've got the right starting point. It accurately reflects what your home is like. And then you can start building your plan. So there's many different ways you can prioritize the improvements you make. So having an approach that reduces your energy bills isn't going to be the same as reducing your carbon emissions, for example. So you can pick your priority or even aim for zero carbon, which is a no holds barred approach to retrofit. And then you put in what your budget is. So you can put any one of these kind of ballpark figures, 10, 20, sky's the limit, or put a number in for your specific budget. And then our system does some clever calculations and tries to work out what would be good options for your home. And it will come up with all these options for you, as you can see here. And you can pick and choose these. So you can filter the top one here with the star. You can kind of filter to only show those. And these are the ones our kind of main recommendations to achieve what you put in here. So for this example, it was zero carbon on an unlimited budget. But then you can start adding or removing things from the plan. So if it's in the plan, you can just remove that, or you can have a scroll through, see what else is on there, and you can kind of pick and choose what you think you might be interested in looking at. And on the right hand side, it will, as you make the changes, it will real time update estimated fuel savings and estimated CO2 emissions and add up the totals as well for the total cost. Now, these costs are just estimated. They're based on what we understand is the size of the property. And it's really just to give you an idea of what these would cost. Obviously, there could be all kinds of factors as to why it may be less or maybe more for a particular property. But it's just to give you an idea, kind of a ballpark idea. And then you can click on each measure to find a bit more. So in this one, I've clicked on air source heat pumps. And it gives you a bit more detail here about what an air source heat pump is. And you can see below there's alternatives on there as well. So it talks here about, maybe if you wanted to improve your heating controls or replace it with a gas boiler. Again, so it gives you an idea so you can compare and contrast between different measures. And then you've got the option, if you use our plan builder, to actually send your plan to us and get in touch with us. So you click on the review button and you can submit it to us, and we'd get in contact with you, and we can make arrangements for one of our retrofit coordinators, such as Sarah, to come pop round and do an assessment of your home and create a what we call a whole house plan, which is it is a bespoke strategy for your home, but it's obviously much more details, because rather than us thinking what's in your home, we actually go in there and measure and confirm exactly what's in your home. Sorry, this is just to show, I forgot this slide was coming up, how to get to the plan builder. So if you go to the Warmer Sussex website, you can see on that top menu bar, plan builder. So click on that and you'll find a link to get into the plan builder. Sorry, and back to our whole house plan. So once Sarah's visited your house and looked in your loft and looked at your boiler or your heating system and checked your windows and doors, etc., she'll put all that data into a system which then generates a baseline of how your home performs today and all the different building elements that Sarah's just run through. So looking at the walls, the roofs, where the losses are coming, any inefficiencies in the heating system, the windows and doors, potential for drafts, how much energy is being used to produce hot water and lighting. So all those elements. And then we come up with some recommendations for you. So you can see what your potential is after a retrofit. So we try to get as low as possible in terms of the CO2 emissions. And you can see how that affects all the different elements of the building. So you can see for this particular property on the left, the wall losses drops down. So I'm guessing there's pretty good wall insulation was recommended for this property. And then we show, that broken down into phases. So for most people, it's always going to be a phased plan unless they're going to move out of the home while all the work is done. And the retrofit coordinator creates that phased plan based on the right sequence of measures, but also based on what your budget is as well. And sometimes, the first phases are normally insulation and ventilation, and the later phases are normally where you then would change and upgrade your heating system. But they are individual to the property and to your particular needs. That's just to give you an idea. And for this service, we charge £200 for a property that's up to 4 beds. And if you've got a larger property, then obviously just get in touch with us and we can have a discussion on the pricing. But so that's just to get into your idea and looking at your options. And the next stages are the design, the specifying, the install. So this is where we really advise that it's you get professional advice and engage an expert. So a professional retrofit coordinator will, like Sarah, will help you avoid all those common mistakes, avoid the risks, and give you real expert advice. So at Warmer Sussex, we require all of our retrofit coordinators to have the level 5 diploma in retrofit coordination. That's always something to check if you're speaking with somebody who's offering their services. There are equivalent qualifications as well, such as registered architects as well. There's also other standards for retrofit. So ENERPHIT, the ENERPHIT, ENERPHIT. This is a standard for retrofitting homes that's been created by Passive House Trust. So it gets to really, really low levels of really high levels, I guess, of air tightness, making sure there's very minimal air leakage in a property and really low energy demand for the property. It's not a cheap route to take, but it is definitely an option that's out there. And there's also the AECB retrofit standard as well. So this is a little bit newer, but it's been around for a couple of years. So this is the Association of Environmentally Conscious Builders and their retrofit standard. So again, this you can find this online. But these are, we couldn't recommend strong enough that you are definitely engaging experts to help you as you plan your retrofit. It's really important. And similarly, installers doing the work, it's really important that you have specialist installers who understand what's needed. So kind of detailing is very important, as we said earlier, and you need to make sure that you're checking their credentials. So look out for standards such as MCS, which is for renewable energy installers, Trustmark, who are the quality standard for energy efficiency installers. And always keep records of what's been installed and how systems operate. It's really important, not only for for your home, but also for, when you sell it, that the person takes it home knows what you've done so far. Right, just conscious of time. I just wanted to, summarize some of the stages here that we just run through. But so the assessment, the what and why. What do you want to do? Why do you need to make those changes? Assess what your starting point is. So, and future-proof your plans. Think ahead. Think about the order as well. What is your strategy? What measures can you install now? And avoid risk it as well. So part insulation, for example, could create problems where you haven't insulated a wall, and also not considering ventilation, as we've said a couple of times tonight. And consider the lifetimes of measures, what repairs might be likely, and try and combine as much as you can in your home. So if you are planning on replacing a kitchen or a bathroom, what can you do? Well, that work has been undertaken to improve the energy efficiency. And then how you do it, as I said, engage a professional. Obviously, Warmer Sussex runs a service. Across Sussex, you've got BESCO, Brighton Hove Energy Services Cooperative in Brighton as well. So make sure you avoid any of those costly mistakes and make sure that the quality of work is high. Okay, so financial help with retrofit. I think I've just seen a couple of questions in the chat around cost. Yeah, it's, if you want to do this well, you're looking at spending, £15,000-20,000, depending on how much other work is required on your house. There are potential areas that you could go for financial assistance with that. There's the Green Homes Grant. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that on the next slide. But you can get up to £5,000 or 10 if you are vulnerable to get help towards energy efficiency measures. The renewable heat incentive is a way to help you with the cost of installing a heat pump or other renewable heat, such as solar thermal and biomass boilers. So you get payments currently quarterly every 7 years, which it can make quite a good contribution to the upfront costs of a heat pump. There is a consultation that's just opened in the last week, I think, Clean Heat Grant consultation. So there are changes afoot on that. So as with a lot of these things, it may not be quite as generous in the future, but we'll wait and see. Local authorities run schemes to help low-income households. So you may have heard of ECO. There's also another one, which is a strange name, called LAD, which is the local authority delivery. But the government are putting a lot more money towards local authorities for them to help local people who are on low incomes, so that there's definitely equity as people work towards improving the energy efficiency of their homes. And then the last one here, green mortgages. There are still not too many, but it is increasing in terms of products on the market where lenders will give you money if you're considering to retrofit your home. Obviously, no surprise, Ecology Building Society are there. I think they have like a retrofit mortgage. But other building societies such as Saffron and Nationwide also have green mortgages as well, that it's worth looking around to see what's out there, what's available. So Green Homes Grant, just a little bit on this. There are some challenges with it. So if any of you have heard or been looking into this, which I guess you have, if you're coming here wanting to know about retrofit, you've probably heard that there are some issues with it. I mean, the main one in the early days was the lack of installers to make the improvements, because the government quite rightly has set very high standards for those installers to make sure the work is done well. So they need to be members of Trustmark and be certified to these standards, which are called MCS or PAS 2030. And there is a lack of installers with those accreditations out there, and certainly across Sussex, there aren't very many at all. But the number is growing. The government has started to put some money towards that a little bit later in the day, perhaps. Early this year, they put some funding for contractors to be able to get those accreditations and be able to offer these grants, because there's a lot of people who can do this and have been around for years doing this, but didn't have those accreditations. There are some constraints in the type of measures. So whilst insulation is, and all the different types of wall insulation that Sarah talked about, floor insulation, loft insulation, are all on the list of things that you can get a grant for. They have to have an approved system, which means that there's like a 25-year insurance-backed guarantee on those. And they don't exist for all of those systems. So it can be a bit of a constraint, and the systems that do exist might not suit your home because, yeah, they're quite low cost systems and might not be the highest quality that you might want in your home. If you live in a conservation area, again, there's some constraints there. There's additional steps that contractors have to go through to be able to do work in a conservation area, because those, you've got to use the right methods and the right materials for a traditionally constructed building. So that is complex and time consuming and not very well understood at the moment. So that is a bit of a challenge with Green Homes Grant. So, and then there's risk, and there are some delays in payment to contractors at the moment. As contractors are part of our membership, we're quite wary of putting them in any kind of difficult financial situation, as you can imagine. So we're very cautious of Green Homes Grant at the moment. We will, we've got customers who are, working towards taking advantage of that, and we are helping with them. But we do say, be cautious, make sure you understand it, and make sure that when you are planning your retrofit, you consider what's right for your home rather than just chasing the grant that's available. Okay, so we've got some time. We've got about 10 minutes for some questions. And I've seen there's quite a lot on the chat. Natasha, do you want to just take us through some of those questions?
So the first one was from the Collingtons, who have asked if this webinar will be available to view again, which it is.
It will be.
Yep, so this is going to be on our website and also put on our YouTube channel to be watched again. And then we had a question from Miles Berkeley, who asked, as the government is getting rid of the Green Homes Grant, where will the money for future retrofitting come from?
Oh, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? So, well, officially they're not scrapping it, are they? It's just going to be a lot less for the extra year that they added. So Retrofit Works, I mean, we're in reasonably regular conversation lobbying government on what they ought to be doing, what we think they should be doing. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they might take action, but not often enough. So, we think, as well as money, there needs to be strong policy as well to encourage people to do this, because at the moment it just takes people who see that the climate emergency is an issue and want to take action. There's some legislation in place for landlords to improve their homes, and that's likely to be tightened, so that they have to, at the moment, a landlord's home has to be an EPC E, which is pretty low, but there's going to be tightened and possibly be required to reach EPC C in the timeline of like 2030, I think. So I think the government needs to maybe think about policy to encourage homeowners, as well as helping with the financial side for those who really are unable to afford to make those changes or unable to access funding to make those changes.
And we had another question of what's the view on hydrogen versus renewable electric for domestic heating?
I thought this one might come up, Cath. I'd heard on the radio that they're piloting and they have put in hydrogen. It's a replacement for gas, so you still have a boiler. But they think that the long term is still going to be electric. So, quick answer for you.
We also had a question from Jane Wigan, who says that the cost of retrofit puts people off who may wish to move in the near future, and therefore the cost of a higher retrofit is too expensive to consider, and how can we overcome this issue? She's also added, I have heard that there may be a long-term payment schedules that could be passed on to new owners at the point of sale.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I definitely think there's policy that the government could put in place to help drive some better financial offerings. There's the Green Finance Institute, and they published some research, I think it was at tail end of last year, where they've been trialing different types of funding mechanisms. So these are going to be loans to people rather than grants. So I just keep an eye out on that. I think at the moment, Green Homes Grant is what the government's offering to homeowners more generally, and then there's funding for low income households. So yeah, there's many different ways that that they could promote retrofit, but I haven't heard of that one about those long-term payment schedules. It sounds a little bit like a Green Deal to me, where the loan that was taken on the property was paid back through the energy bills, and that would always stay with the owners of the property, would repay that because they're the ones benefiting from the investment. But I think the way that was implemented the Green Deal itself wasn't particularly well. So I know there's still probably people paying off those loans in that way, but not that many. But there's a market out there for creativity from financial institutions. So hopefully they'll come up with something.
There is another question as well. How could maintenance schedules and property management companies support retrofit in houses that contain multiple flats?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. We have worked with some big block of flats actually in Hove, where there was around 20 odd flats in that block. And we did a survey of the whole block. But yeah, and that was in partnership with the management company as well. But at the end of the day, everybody has to agree at the moment. So every resident in that building would have to agree to put money into a pot, because their existing maintenance funds only cover maintenance, and at the moment insulation and work like that is considered an improvement. So it does take those people who live within the flat and those property management companies to be looking forwards, and yeah, I don't think they're there yet. And again, it might need that push from the government to help that. I mean, obviously we've got issues at the moment with those properties that have been clad external wall insulation, haven't we? And those occupants then trying hard to, they've been sold really poor flammable insulation, put it on the homes, and now need support to get that removed. So it's a really tricky area that the government obviously would probably need to come up with a strong policy on.
We also have a question from Chris Twin, who asked, would you expect to reposition the gas/electric intake cupboard to the outside of a newly installed external wall insulation?
That's a very good one for Sarah.
Oh, crikey, sorry. You've got an external cupboard for your gas meter. Is that what you're saying? Yes, they do need to be insulated.
Yes, will it be repositioned to the outside of a newly installed external wall insulation?
It will, otherwise you've got a gap, and this is one of the areas where continuity of insulation is paramount. Even if it's a bit awkward, you find a way to do it, because otherwise on the other side of the wall you've got a big cold patch, and which will just gather vapor when the air's moist in your house, and and just create a damp patch. Yeah,
you have to move things like the rainwater goods or your everything, extend flues, so everything that's on the outside has to be repositioned, doesn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, and placements, you need to know where they're going to be fixed, because fixing points have to be placed within the insulation.
Yeah.
So.
We have a question from Adam Santos, who asks, surely it would be better to excavate to insulate solid floor?
Yeah, this is definitely, you've got to drill up sometimes you can, the screed is very friable, and you can drill up the screed and cart it out and then put some insulation in place. Sometimes it's easier just to use a very thin, expensive insulation. Depends what area you're looking at. It's on a case by case. Every house is different.
Yeah, and how much mess and disruption people want to tolerate.
Although, not to be able to wear your slippers is valuable, isn't it? To walk around your house without.
Yeah, if you speak to anybody who's had their floor insulated, they do sing their praises.
We've also had, can you use a heat pump with a traditional central heating system as a replacement for a gas boiler?
I've heard that you can do it, but probably not the best way to get an efficient system. If you have an air source heat pump, you need a new hot water cylinder to suit it.
Yeah, I guess it depends what you're starting with, doesn't it? When you say traditional heating system, so whether or not you've got a cylinder or a combination boiler. I mean, you can certainly still use the same wet system. An installer would have a look at your radiators and the heat demand, wouldn't they, just to assess whether you need any slightly larger radiators in any rooms, or might have to swap them around and perhaps pop a new one in a certain room.
Yeah, I mean, the radiator underfloor heating. So if you've had some underfloor insulation you can put some underfloor heating because it works on a lower temperature. So the larger the area that heat can radiate from, so whole floor's great. You can put it into the walls. I've got pipes in my walls at home, or you can just have larger radiators. And you may have a very small heating load, so just making the radiators larger might be sufficient.
We've also had, can you say more about ventilation solutions?
I can
make this very quick. It depends how airtight your goal is. Let's say you're going the whole hog, Enefit, I want the best. Then you're going to not get any trickle vents in your windows. You're not going to have those built in. You're just going to find until you can get you get a system put in the roof that extracts and inputs and has a heat recovery. And that's like the bee's knees in ventilation. But there are lots of great systems that come on the market. Demand control ventilation, which can be individually fitted to every room, that delivers fresh air and extracts pollutants, but it does it when the pollutants reach a certain level. So they can react to outgassing pollutants. They can moisture in the air, humidity, carbon dioxide level. So we're getting into the realms of there's a lot of different systems out there, and they do fantastic things. Just depends how airtight your house is going to be.
Yeah, I think as we said earlier, we've got another webinar, so it's going to be next Tuesday at the same time, where we're going to go into a lot more detail about insulation and ventilation systems, all the different levels that you can go to depending on, as they were saying, how much you're insulating your home. So if you're interested in finding out more, please do join us on that webinar. But like this one, we will be recording it and posting it on our website. So if you're not able to make it, you can listen back afterwards. We've just gone past 8 o'clock now, so we'll probably have to draw it to a close. There's quite a few questions still, so we will get back to everybody who's asked a question. We will send these out to everybody. And if we don't answer it, by all means, you know where to find us. You can send us a question. You can contact us directly at Warmer Sussex, and we'd be more than happy to chat with you about your particular question and make sure we've got a good answer for you. So I think with that, I'd say thank you very much for everybody who's joined. Apologies we haven't got to all the questions tonight. I hope it's been useful for you. I hope you've been able to learn something about retrofit and feel a bit inspired about finding out more about what you can do to retrofit your home. So yeah, thank you all for your time. Thank you for your questions. And maybe hopefully see you next Tuesday on our insulation and ventilation webinar. Thank you for everybody.
Bye now.
Good
Thanks
night.
everyone.
Thank you.